Hey guys, it's Matt. Welcome back to another video. Today I'm going to be talking about my Sony FX30 settings that I use when shooting. Let's get into it. One of the things that I love about the FX30 is the amount of customizing that you can do within the camera. The Sony FX30 has a really cool feature called Memory Recall, and this allows you to create custom camera settings for all different types of situations. Let me show you how to do it. You're going to go to Menu, you're going to go to Shooting Mode, then you're gonna go to Camera Set Memory, and from there, you're gonna see a bunch of options. You're gonna see M1 through M4, don't touch those. Those are camera memory settings that are specific to the SD card that you're using. So if you put custom settings in the M1 through M4, when you format that SD card, and at some point you're gonna delete all those settings. So don't do it. Just stick with the 1, 2, and 3. So at 24 frames, that's gonna be my first one, and then I'm gonna change my shutter speed, second one to 60 frames at 4K, 10-bit color, and then my third one is gonna be 120 frames at 1080 at 8-bit color. And the reason why it's 1080 and not 4K is because I don't have the SD cards right now to get 120 frames per second at 4K. But this camera is capable of doing that. And that gets to my next point, the SD card. Sometimes it's kind of hard to read SD cards because there's a lot of numbers on it, and different SD cards are gonna be placed at different price ranges. And that's not just because of the amount of storage that it is, but it also has to do with the speed at which the SD card reads and writes to the camera. If you wanna record 4K to your camera, you need your SD card to say U3. But I have a U3 SD card and I still can't shoot 4K. Why is that? The reason why is because there's another number called V30 that's on the card. And the 30 represents the amount of megabytes that the camera is transferring over to the SD card. For 4K, you're gonna need a minimum of a V60, 60 megabytes per second, to record content from the SD card to the camera in order to shoot at 120 frames per second in 4K. So right now, even though I have the U3, I only have a V30 128 gigabyte SD card, so I'm only able to shoot up to 1080, but honestly, in my experience, I really don't need the 120 at 4K right now. But one of the reasons why I really love this camera is the amount of customization. I mean, look at this thing. There are so many buttons scattered around this camera, it makes it really easy to film content. Pair that up with the fact that I get 3 custom shooting modes, I can switch from so many different environments super quickly. For ISO, especially when I'm moving around and things are going so fast, instead of pressing like a bunch of buttons and da-da-da-da-da, I actually like to use the scroll wheel on the back of the camera to change my ISO. So we have a scroll wheel up here and another scroll wheel on the back of the camera. I like to control the aperture on the front of the camera. And this back scroll wheel is kind of a little hard for my thumb to get at some points. You guys gotta think about it this way. If I have 3 custom modes, I'm shooting sports and I wanna shoot at 60 frames, the shutter speed is already set to the correct amount in those 3 different modes. I wanna put my shutter control at the most difficult scroll wheel throughout all the 3. And the reason why is because mainly the 2 that I'm switching out the most are my ISO and my aperture. So that's why my aperture's up here and my ISO's on my scroll wheel right here. So it's super fast and easy for me to change settings. Rarely am I ever going to manually be changing my shutter speed when I have 3 different modes that compensate for that shutter depending on the situation. When you're thinking about shutter speed, ask yourself this question. How long is my camera sensor being exposed to light? This setting is measured in fractions of a second. So if I'm shooting at 1/60, that means that I would be shooting at 1/60th of a second. A high shutter speed means that your image is gonna be a little bit darker and it's going to have less motion blur. Sometimes you're thinking about it and you're like, wait, well, I kinda like motion blur. Motion blur looks normal. Well, if you're shooting sports and people are running around, or let's say someone's jumping up and dunking a basketball, you want to shoot at a high shutter speed so that every single frame of that image is crystal clear. Because if I'm dunking a basketball,
stop the cap.
and my hands are blurry, the image is blurry because the person's moving so fast, it doesn't really look that great. So when I'm filming sports, I always tend to shoot at a high shutter speed, because that way, every frame that's getting captured, if I have a player running down the field, I know with confidence that every motion that that player is doing is going to be in focus on my camera. A lower shutter speed is going to provide more light to the image, and it's more of like a cool blurry effect. That's definitely a different style of shooting. You're definitely going for a certain aesthetic when you're filming like that. I would never really film like that. I know some photographers take pictures at low shutter speeds to get a certain look, but I personally don't shoot at low shutter speeds. The next is aperture. This can get a little confusing, but stay with me. A lower f-stop means a wider aperture, which means that less of the image is in focus, creating a more shallow depth of field. This is perfect for portraits. If I'm filming sports and I'm at a high shutter speed, I definitely want that f-stop to be up to like a 5.6 to like an 11. As I lose that shallow depth of field, but I'm making sure that every single motion of that athlete is in focus. And that's what's gonna look best when creating and editing the videos. Your shutter speed should always be double your frame rate. The reason why you want your shutter speed to be double your frame rate is because it creates motion blur that looks natural to the eye. The camera also has an S&Q mode, which films beautiful slow motion at 120 frames per second. But my mode 3 is also 120 frames per second, so what's the difference between the slow motion and the mode 3? The difference is that slow motion does not record audio. So I would recommend filming at the mode 3 at 120 frames because you can still record audio. If you go and film a slow motion video, you'll be able to see that slow motion in real time. Sometimes when I'm filming real estate and I'm filming a bunch of home tours and I know I'm gonna be walking and doing a lot of movement, I'm okay with filming in slow motion because I'm not really recording any audio. I just want that buttery smooth slow motion that I can also speed ramp in Premiere in order to make the edits look cooler and flashier and garnish more attention. So I'm gonna go over the button customizations that I use for my camera. We have 4 buttons at the top. There's also a bunch of other buttons and settings that you can choose on the back of your camera. I'm not really gonna get into that today because I honestly don't really use it a lot. I'm gonna kind of just go over what my settings are. I'm going to my menu and I'm going to the yellow setup at the very bottom, dial customization, the 4th one. I have my custom key dial set for pictures and then my custom key dial set for videos. Since I normally do videos, I'm gonna click that one. There's 5 different sections. The rear of the camera, the top of the camera, the front of the camera, the lens, which I don't have a button on my lens right now, and then the dials and the wheels. First, I'm gonna talk about the rear of the camera. There's a lot of different settings that you can choose, guys. There's a lot of customizations. I'm gonna be honest. The main buttons that I use on the rear of the camera are the play button, so I can watch back what I filmed, and the function button in case I want to change any of my function settings in that little menu. I don't really use any of the rear buttons, but I use all of the rear scroll wheels, and I'll get into that later. The top. This is kind of the section of the camera that I really wanted to cover. There's 5 different buttons in all of this. My first button, number 1, changes my camera from autofocus to manual focus. I usually always film in autofocus, but in case I need to film in manual focus, I can just click that button. The best thing about this is I don't have to go digging in the menus for all these different things. I can just do it. When I click custom button 1, once I select that and I click enter on the camera, I can then go to which menu setting I want that button to be attached to, and then I click it, and then we're good to go. My second button is just white balance. It just brings up the white balance menu. Again, usually I film in auto white balance, so I don't really touch that a lot. But depending, especially if I'm shooting indoors, there are definitely times where I have to manually change my white balance in order to get the best image. I mainly focus on white balance when I'm dealing with skin tones, when I'm filming people, because if you get the skin tones to match, you're pretty much gonna nail the shot. If a person walks into a room and the room has super orange lighting, you're gonna wanna change your Kelvin temperature to match that weird, awkward lighting so that the person's skin tones appear natural on camera. 3 is my metering mode. The metering mode basically gives me the sweet spot to where I want my exposure on my camera. I always aim for a 1.7 to a 2.0. I rarely film overexposed. Well, what do I mean when I say overexposed? When that metering mode is blinking and it has a plus 2.0 on it, that means that you're overexposed. And then as you move the camera, it'll obviously change that metering based on how much light is in the shot. My 4th button is my variable shutter. I rarely use that because, again, I don't really need to change my shutter speed. I already have my shutter speed set for the 3 different modes that I would be filming in. So personally, I don't use button number 4, but again, this is another reason why I love the FX30 so much, is because there's so many buttons, there's so many tools and settings that you can attach to all of these buttons to make your filming easy and seamless. Button number 5 is just the record button, so I just use that to record. There are so many indicators that I love that shows that this camera is recording, so I hope you guys can see this one right up here. If I have my camera on a tripod and I'm away from the camera and I'm filming and I'm sitting down, the screen does flip out, but I can always see if I'm looking directly at the camera, boom, my camera is recording. Also on top, look at that, guys. Beautiful bright red button right there to record. And then on the back, there's 2 indicators. This border around the screen turns red and you get this big light. This whole thing lights up when you're recording, which is great. You know with confidence, oh, I am recording, oh, I'm not recording. Guys, another thing that I want to quickly mention is that the camera also has a button in the front, a record button. So if I have this camera on a tripod and for some reason I can't be behind the camera, I love that I can hit this button from the front of the camera. Thank you so much for watching. That's going to wrap it up for today. Thank you so much. Goodbye.